Hello and welcome to my second channel, Johnny Gets Cash 2. Now if you're here because you saw me talking about this Jaguar on my first channel, Johnny Gets Cash, thank you for coming along and checking out the new channel. As promised, I'm going to be going into the details on this Jaguar X-type that I sold. Now, to refresh your memory, I bought this X-type in auction sight unseen. It arrived in a real state with undeclared damage. It was a complete disaster. Nonetheless, it was a one-owner car, sovereign spec, 81,000 miles, and I saw a future in it. I thought it was worth fixing. But having done all of that work and using the car for probably 500 miles myself before selling it, and having every faith in it, I should add, after a couple of days of the new owner taking this car on, they phoned me reporting an engine light and a gearbox fault on the binnacle, which was very, very strange. So basically, in this episode, the first episode on my second channel, I'm going to be giving you the full breakdown of the costs on this car, i.e. what I spent on it, what I sold it for, and therefore the money I made. The full scenario with regards to why it was returned and how that came to be. And also, I'm going to be showing you what I've had to do to fix this car and get it basically ready to roll again. So if you want to see that, stay tuned. So as promised in the video on my main channel, on this channel, we're going to be going into the nitty-gritty of what I do, and that means facts and figures. So let me start by getting my little black book and going through the numbers on this Jaguar X-type. So, as I first bought this car, I bought it in auction, and that means I had to pay auction fees. So as I first bought this car, in terms of what I bid for it and the auction fees on top of that, as this car landed, it owed me £1,684.76. Now that probably doesn't sound like a lot of money in the real world, but for a car like this, it was strong money. Now, had the damage that was on it been declared, I wouldn't have paid anything like that for it. It would have been probably half that, if that. So I paid, in my opinion, strong money for a car that had the amount of damage that this one did. But nonetheless, I bid sight unseen. The bid was on me, so I stood on, and that's what I paid for it, £1,684.76. Obviously, as soon as I got the car, I realised there was money to be spent. And here's what I spent it on. I spent £190 on replacement panels. So genuine Jaguar parts offer another car, so that was £190. In terms of the underside, there was no rust to deal with, but these cars do like to rust on the rearmost inner sill, so about here. Now fortunately this car didn't have any rust issues, but I could tell if I didn't act soon it would have rust in the future. So that was a case of buzzing it back, using some Hydrate 80 and putting some stone chip over that area. Now those are things I keep in stock anyway, but in terms of keeping track of costs, I've allowed around about £10 worth of consumables in that respect, so £10 there. The paint I had to buy to respray that front bumper and the smart repairs I had to do, the paint was £20.12. New number plates were £21. The MOT fee with one new tyre was £109.50. I had to buy some trim clips. If you recall that this door card here wasn't fitting right, I had to buy new trim clips, Jaguar specific ones. They were £4.15. The car came with fuel in it, surprisingly, but still I put more in it. So because I like to record every single pound to give you the full breakdown of costs, the fuel prior to sale was £15 I put in, and the advertising costs were £20. So that meant at that stage, this car in total owed me £2,074.53. Okay, so that's quite a respectable figure to be into a one-owner sovereign with 81,000 miles. I was pleased with that. So I actually advertised the car at £3,500, which in my opinion was a very, very keen price. Now looking at others, similar year, similar mileage, similar spec and an estate, you can give 6 or 7 grand for one of these. So I thought at £3,500, it was a real fair price. Now, somewhat surprisingly, the phone didn't start ringing off the hook straight away. So I thought to myself, maybe I've got it wrong with the price, because it happens to all of us. You can only try, can't you? So £3,500 is what I went in at. Couple of inquiries, nothing too serious. So I gave it about a week at 3.5 grand before reducing it. I reduced it to £3,250. So not a huge amount off, but it was more in the ballpark that I think was going to work. And, you know, the phone did start ringing. I got a lot of inquiries pretty quickly. And I said to all the people who inquired, the same as I say on every car I sell, when I've got a lot of inquiries that is, it's a first come, first served deal. If you can get here first with the money and you like the car, it's yours. So there we are. I wasn't picking favourites. Whoever could get here first could have it. And believe it or not, there was something of a bun fight for it. There were several people wanting it. But the first person that came, they came to see it. They looked all over the car, inside, outside, underneath as much as you can. They tested every knob, switch, button, lever. They drove the car. They really liked the car. Obviously, there's a few things that aren't perfect, things that I declared in the advert. There's a little pin dent there. The bubbling waste seals, which I couldn't find replacements for. If you've seen the videos on the main channel, you'll be aware of these things. But I was honest about all these little faults that were on the car and little bits and pieces. And the buyer was fine with that. They were aware of these things and they liked the car. So anyway, remember, I'd advertised it at £3,250 at this point. They didn't want to give that for it. Fair enough. I'm always up for negotiation. That's just how the world goes round. I wasn't going to take a huge amount off because, as I said, I had a queue of people wanting this car at that money. So I'll always give someone something, but I wasn't going to give it away. So long story short, we agreed a deal of £3,100. Okay, so at £3,100 sale, that showed me a profit of £1,025.47. And I was really happy with that. Bear in mind, this car had me a shade over £2,000, and I've just pulled a shade over £1,000 clean out of it. So I was really, really happy with that. As I say, I was completely confident in this car. I'd been driving this much more than I drive most cars I sell. I'd done probably, it's got to be 500 miles I've done in this car, mainly because it's a diesel estate. It's just a useful thing to have. So I was really confident. I mean, I only ever sell cars that I believe are good cars anyway, but ironically, this is one that I'd used quite a lot, and I really did have no worries with it. So the car sold, it left me. Now, if you're in the trade, you'll be aware the first 24 hours after you sell a car, you're always on sort of tenterhooks waiting for a phone call. Not necessarily bad news, but people sometimes don't understand how certain things work, or they want to know where the lock and wheel nut key is, or silly things. And so you're always kind of aware you're going to get a call. The first 24 hours went by, not a peep, which was great. I wasn't really surprised, but great news. However, fast forward a couple of days, and I did have a call from the new owner, somewhat frustrated, I would say, which is fair enough, saying that they had had a light come up on the dash, which was a flashing glow plug light and a big message that said gearbox fault. And I thought, how strange, on an 81,000 mile car that I've been driving myself quite a lot, it should show on the surface quite a drastic message. So I said to the people that they still like the car, so I wanted to get it right for them. So they were about an hour and a half from me. So what I decided to do, rather than play the rule book exactly and say bring it back to me and I'll sort it, because obviously that would incur a cost to them, it would take them time to bring it back to me, and I didn't want to be that guy. So I tried to be as helpful as possible. I found a garage near to them who could look at it ASAP, which happened to be the next day. In the meantime, I'd done some research on this, the fault that had been described, and quite strangely, but seemingly common on these cars, I've read a lot of things on the forums about it, if the turbo gets blocked up with carbon, it can stop the actuator from doing its job, and that throws essentially an engine light, which is a flashing glow plug light, and this gearbox fault can come up as a bit of a gremlin issue. So the cure to that is to clean the turbo out. So I said to the garage who had booked it in with to have a look at it, could you put some turbo cleaner through it just as a first instance? And they said that wouldn't be a problem. Obviously it's quite an easy job. No worries. I said, I'll pay you for it. Don't ask the people who bring it into you to pay. I'll cover all of it. So anyway, when the garage phoned me and said, it's all been done, here's your bill, I was expecting something between £50 and £100, because if you're using Revive, I mean, that's 50 or 60 quid for a kit. Anyway, long story short, that garage charged me the grand total of £12. So what I think they'd actually done is just put system cleaner in the tank, because they told the new owner, right, go for an hour's long drive and let that work its way through. So not exactly what I was expecting them to do, but it had been done quickly, and the car was driving without issue at that point. So I spoke to the new owner and they said they'll drive it. Anyway, caught up with them later that evening, and apparently the light had come back on. So clearly that system cleaner hadn't done its job. Not really surprised. System cleaner is not what I was expecting them to do, but hey, that's what the garage did, didn't solve it. Because of this gearbox fault, that light that had come on, the new owner had booked into a local to them gearbox specialist. Now I should say I've used this gearbox specialist in the past for a gearbox rebuild on one of my 4x4 projects, and I've always got on well with them. I thought they were good people, but they booked it in for this gearbox investigation, and that was going to cost £145. So at this point I'm thinking that's a lot of money, but if it truly is a gearbox fault, we need to know, because if for some crazy reason that gearbox is toast, I can't let these people keep the car. I can't let them have a car with a knackered gearbox. But also I don't believe that is the case. So I said, yeah, go ahead. Let's see what the professionals say when they plug it in. And that's exactly what they did. They literally plugged it into an OBD scanner. So for £145, what this garage have done is plug in a scanner and give a printout report of all the error codes on the car. They haven't given any suggestion about anything to do with the gearbox. In fact, I think the words they used, according to the new owner, was, "We won't touch anything on this car until all the error codes have been sorted." So read into that what you will, but basically £145 to plug in an OBD scanner and say we're not doing any more. Again, I ended up paying for that, not a problem. However, this is where the twist in the tail comes, because after that quite damning report from the gearbox specialist, the owner of this car, who I told it to, we had a conversation, and he was quite understandably a little bit worried at this point, because I think this garage had said, "Oh, there's hundreds of issues on the car, it's basically a nightmare, we're not touching it." And he was starting to get a bit wobbly at this point. So when I spoke to him, I'm not the sort of guy who's going to try and persuade someone to keep a car that they've got any doubts about. I don't want people to have cars from me that aren't 100% right. So I said to him there and then, "Look, I'll give you a full refund on the car, and I'll take it away from you, I'll come and get it." Now, in fairness to the new owner, I think he realised if I wanted to play by the book, the rules state bring the car back to me and I'll give you a full refund. And I think he realised I was trying to be a good guy here. I offered to go and get the car, and fair play to him, he said, "Don't worry, I'll meet you halfway." So physically and metaphorically, he drove the car halfway, I drove halfway, I gave him a refund there and then, and I took the car back. Now, I drove the car back from that point and it didn't miss a beat, okay? The car was absolutely perfect. So I'm a little bit stumped what the issue could be. So I did a little bit more research, and I was kind of drilling down mainly on this turbo blockage issue. And essentially, what I found out was a lot of people are saying to clean the turbo out, or the quick way of doing it is to literally drill into the turbo and clean it with Mr. Muscle. Now, I'm not all that fond of that idea, but it does seem to be something that people do on these cars. But before getting really drastic like that, what I thought I would do was look at alternatives. And what I found out was the turbo actuator on these cars is a real problem area. So having spoken to Market Auto Reserve, you may remember I dealt with Market Auto Reserve before when I was buying panels, he suggested check that actuator, disconnect it, make sure the actuator arm is free on the turbo. If it is, most likely the chances are that actuator is at fault. So I will cut the video now and show you what I did with regards to that actuator and what happened when I opened it up. Okay, so now that the Jaguar is back in the workshop, obviously I'm focusing my attentions on the turbo. Now, worst case scenario, it's going to be turbo off and either a complete clean out of the turbo itself or a replacement. But before doing that, I've removed the actuator, which actually sits just on the other side of this plate. Here is the original actuator. Now, I'm aware that these things can be faulty on this 2.2 diesel, so in the Jag and also in its Ford Mondeo counterpart. So I've started the car with all these covers off and had a quick look, and I don't feel like that was moving very nicely. But just to clarify myself there, I've taken it off and I'm moving this actuator rod here. If that was notchy or stiff, then I would say the problem is inside the turbo, as in it's coked up. All the carbon buildup is stopping the veins from opening and moving, etc. But this is so smooth that I really don't think that is the problem, which does back up my theory that this actuator is duff. Now, that wouldn't surprise me at all because, as I say, it's a common fault. So I wanted to open this up and have a look inside and see if I could figure out a few things that could have gone wrong with it. I'm going to replace it anyway, but just for interest's sake, I'm going to show you what's inside of here. So yeah, that's nice and smooth. Let's check out this actuator. Okay, so here is our original actuator. You can see the arm there. I popped the clips off this thing and separated it just to show you what's going on inside. Now, as you can see, it's a worm drive situation in here, but what I found very strange is, if you look very closely, you can see that a lot of the teeth have been removed from the actual worm drive itself. So the pinion here seems to be fine, but the worm drive seems to be absolutely knackered. Now, I don't know how that could have happened, but I'm sure it's not helping the actuation of the arm. Put this back together and show you. I'm sure altogether that is causing us problems. So that can go straight in the bin, and I've got a new one. So here is our shiny new turbo actuator. Obviously it looks exactly the same, other than the fact it's much fresher and newer. So I'm going to stick this on the car now, and we'll take it for a little drive and see if everything seems to work as it should. Okay, so as you can see, I've fitted a brand new actuator on the turbo side, and it seems to have solved the problem. I took it for a drive afterwards and it was absolutely fine, but I had the idea I wanted to keep this car in my ownership for a couple of weeks at least and do some real miles with it and make sure. Now, I've been driving this a fair bit, and today I've been on quite a long journey in the car and it was absolutely flawless. But again, let's cut to that and you can see how I got on with that drive. Okay guys, so here I am back driving the Jaguar again, and I'm not at all upset about it. This is an absolutely lovely car to drive. Now, I changed that turbo actuator as you've seen, and I said I'm going to use it myself for a little while. Well, today I thought I'd give it a really good test. I'm just coming back from looking at my trip, just under 100-mile round trip to collect some seats for the Daihatsu 4-track project. And this car was the perfect car for it. A, because I need to give it a really good test, but also it's an estate car, it's great for collecting things like seats. It's a diesel, so it's good on fuel. Long journeys are absolutely no problem to it. So yeah, nearly 100 miles doing this job, and it hasn't put a foot wrong. It's been absolutely perfect. So I'm very, very confident that any small issues that were in the system are now sorted by changing the actuator. The car is genuinely really impressive. Everything works, all the aircon, all the touchscreen nav and all that stuff. Everything that I could have needed today and have been testing, everything works perfectly. But then I said before, like, I was driving this car for a long time before I sold it, and I had every confidence what a great car it was. It just so happened that apparently once I sold it, these issues showed up. I mean, I can't say because I couldn't replicate them, but I can only assume they were there because of the plug-in test that garage did. But anyway, let's assume they were. I think changing the actuator was probably a good thing to do anyway, because having read into it, they do seem to be quite a problem area in these cars. So I'm not at all upset to have had to have done that, but there we are. The car is driving absolutely flawlessly, and I couldn't be more pleased with it. So all that really remains for me to do is to continue using this car for a few more days, maybe a week. I'd like to get a few hundred miles on it just to really give it a proper test, so I can really say I'm absolutely confident that there's no remaining issues. I'm already pretty confident there's no remaining issues, but you know, it is sometimes you have to go the extra mile. So that's what I'll do. I'll continue to drive this car for a little while longer, put 500-600 miles on it, and see where we are. But all being well, she should be ready to get detailed once more and go back on the market. Okay, so again, the car is behaving absolutely perfectly with me. Now, I do think that actuator probably was at fault, because you saw inside of it, it was pretty grotty. I just think it was sod's law that the car never misbehaved for me. It just happened to do it when the new owners were driving the car. So anyway, where do we stand with costs? I said before, this thing owed me £2,074.53. Well, I spent £12 on that system cleaner. I spent £145 on having an OBD scanner plugged into it. How ridiculous. And that turbo actuator was £55. So altogether at this stage, this car owes me £2,286.53, which I think is actually still a fair price. To have something like this stand you in at that money is pretty good news. Regardless of all of that though, the car is not for sale right now, and it won't be for a little while, because I'm going to continue to use it, because I want to be absolutely confident, beyond confident, that this car isn't going to let anyone else down. So I'm going to continue to drive it. At the moment, I can't foresee any issues. When I first took this car back, I was so frustrated about the issues apparently being there that I couldn't see. I really had a moment where I was falling out of love with it, but having used it, it's just such a comfortable, usable, decent car. I can't see any problems with it. So I am going to be happy to sell it again, but I want to put many more miles on it yet. I think also, as a precautionary measure, what I might do is give it a gearbox service as well. I may as well, while I'm here and I'm waiting for a few weeks while I'm using it, give it a gearbox service, some new fluid, new filters, and just make sure it's as good as it can be. So then guys, that kind of wraps up the story up to now on this Jaguar. It's a bit of a shame that a car that I feel like I worked quite hard to bring it back to its best ended up letting me down, because to be honest, I never really get cars back. I'm so cautious with the cars that I do sell. It's very, very rare that I have any complaints, and for this one to be bad enough for me to have a full refund, it's a bit of a punch in the guts. But on that same note, I really don't think this is a bad car. I think it was just a small element playing up, and it just threw some lights that weren't accurate, and it was worrying. So I think that's the situation. As I say, I'm going to keep this car for a little while, and then I'll sell it again. But for now, that is it. Now, this might have been a bit of a nitty-gritty talking episode, but that is exactly what this channel is all about. Johnny Gets Cash 2 is the channel where you're going to get full breakdown of figures. You're going to get the full story on things that go wrong, things behind the scenes, just to give you a bit of a better insight on how things work, because it's a sad fact that it's not all sunshine and roses in this business. And the main channel, I do try and stay positive and focus on all the exciting things that are happening, but it's not always the case. Sometimes things do go wrong. And I think it's interesting to share those things with you. So anyway, thank you very much for joining me on this first video on the second channel. I'll be very, very interested to know what your thoughts are on this. Have you experienced something similar, especially with a Jag? Have I done the right thing with that actuator? Is there something else I need to be looking at? Because I know a lot of you watching this will know much, much more about these cars than I do. So as always, your input and your thoughts will be very, very gratefully received. So let me know in the comments what I could be missing on this thing. And also, if anyone wants a cheap Jaguar X-type, then feel free to hit me up. You can contact me through Instagram. I'll put my username on screen now. But until next time, guys, thank you ever so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next one. Cheers.